For the discussion this week, I did want to do something a little bit different. Um, this way, I think it helps me to make sure I kind of touch on different questions everybody has. So, since all these posts that everybody put up since the discussion board, it's available for everyone to see. I don't feel like I'm putting anybody on the spot that that wouldn't have already been on the spot to be have their responses or questions seen by anybody else. So that's kind of what I'm going to do. I know that some of you have a lot of the same type of questions, but I want to go through and at least touch on pretty much every question, except there's some of them that I will spend a little more time on. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So uh, there are, if you want to talk about initiation with gangs, we'll get into why people want to get into gangs, things like that, or how that works. But initiation, it's different. It depends on, yes, you have some places and some gangs, depending on where they're at, and also how well affiliated you are, in essence, how well connected you are within the gang. It depends on what you want to do. So some gangs, and a lot of them especially, have blood in, blood out type of situations, to where the original idea behind blood in, blood out was criminal activity, specifically, the killing of another person or a rival gang member, something along those lines, that would get you into the gang. The other option is beat ins, okay, which also is considered blood in, blood out, okay, and that's probably the most common, to where uh, it won't be every member of the gang beats on you, but in essence, you are put before a group of some of the members of the gang, and they basically uh, you fight with them. Uh, Ultimately, it's to see, for one, if you're willing to go through the beating. Second of all, it also shows what kind of fighter you can be. But nonetheless, you can be beaten. In addition to the crimes that are committed, especially murder type of crimes. However, um, the other crimes can occur, such as robbery. That's just an example. Theft, whatever. Carjacking or car theft, auto theft. Those are all options, but the beating in is probably the most common that you would have. And same thing goes when you get done being in the gang. In essence, when most people get through their younger years, if they live that long, um, most people are not going to be lifelong gang members. Okay, they may be affiliated with some, whatever, but usually by the time they either want to actually have a family, or by the time they get too old to where that whole gang scene is kind of pointless to them, which I think it's pointless anyway. But they get to that point, and so very rarely can you just kind of like ride off into the sunset. You have to have some type of either crime to get out or get beat out, either one. But occasionally, depending on how high up you are in your rank, sometimes you can change that. Another one that they're getting into more often, going back to initiation, is if you know someone who is really high up, basically they won't require as much from you, because you have, uh, in essence, you have cred from other people that your family members, etc. Yeah, if you come from a line of like your dad, or family members were part of the gang, you will not have to do as much to prove your worth to them. So that's another way, basically the easier way of getting in. Um, but as far as for females, okay, you can be beat in or sexed in. So basically, those who choose, they're rare, but those who choose to do the beat in, they can have the be beat in by male and or female gang members. Um, but usually, since most gangs are made mostly of men, it would be of by men get beat by. But if there are female members, they can also join in on the beating. The other one is the sexton. What you end up running into there's kind of like in our normal society and in prison society, we have this idea of, oh well, like there's kind of these rungs, or rungs on the ladder of where you fall. So in prison, the child molesters are basically at the bottom. Okay, that's why we don't try not to put them in Gen Pop too often. So either way, getting back to the gangs, the females who sex their way in are basically either gang raped or they are sexed in. They are viewed as lower because they basically just use their sexuality to get in instead of being tough and also having some standard in essence, instead of just letting anybody and everybody have sex with you and be used like that. They actually prefer the ones who find other ways, whether it be through crime or through beatings, to come in. So I just thought I'd point that out for the hierarchy, and we will touch on female gangs. Come back to that in a little bit later, but and yes, okay. So going back to Devorah's questions about some of this, or at least comment. Two races that make the majority of the gangs are, African American and Latino or Hispanic, and that's true. There are, gangs of different backgrounds. There's white gangs. Usually, the white gangs typically are your Aryan type of, the Aryan Brotherhood, which is actually a prison gang. It's not a street gang at all. And then you have skinheads, so it's a different varieties of them. I don't want to go into all the different options you have, but in essence, those are the two primary ones you have. Some of them, and there are even some branches of those that go beyond the if you want to call it neo-Nazi aspect of it. Some of them are more of an Irish aspect. Some of them I said Celtic before with Irish, but they have that. Nordic, okay, is another one. But either way, there's that. Blacks and Hispanics. I will get into the differences in the East Coast gangs, West Coast gangs, their origins. I believe I made it available for you guys to look at the history of it, but that's something else I want to cover. Actually, probably need to make another whole video for that instead of in this feedback. So I'll try to remember to do that, like the origins, that kind of video. So, all right, let's get back to going back to answer that. As far as the majority are African American Latinos, that's true. Okay, let's back out of this and see what Caden. Okay, MS-13. MS-13, most of you have already heard about them at some point in time. Considered to be an extremely violent gang, but their origins go back to El Salvador. And the original MS members are now basically the fathers of some of the members now. But you have in the, I believe it was 80s and 90s, you had the Civil War in El Salvador, and that caused a lot of upheaval, a lot of poverty, a lot of problems basically in El Salvador, specifically San Salvador. But anyway, and these Salvadorians basically formed these street gangs. Some say it was like the rebel groups, but it really wasn't. It was those people who felt disenfranchised, but were still, and also had dealt with the violence of the Civil War itself. So some of them were child soldiers, essentially. And then some of them were just basically using a weakened government and economy and situation as an opportunity for a power grab. So therefore, they kind of come up with this. It's I'm trying to remember Actually, I should know what the Mara Savutra, I think, is how it's pronounced. But it's the name, that's the MS part is. Okay. So eventually, long story short, that group kind of got booted out of El Salvador. So in order to continue to make money illegally through, drug sales, arms dealing, things like that, they had to, or other illegal activities, they had to move their operation elsewhere, and they filtered up through Central America, eventually made their way to the United States. and it's a growing number, especially a couple years ago with the border. I say couple, but it's been more like in the last, say, 5 years, especially whenever it was during the Obama administration, where they basically encouraged people to citizens of Central America to come to the U.S. And then during the Trump administration, they had to deal with some of that. You were getting a lot of MS members who were coming up that way, claiming they were family members of other people going along, and that wasn't necessarily the case. But that's the history, the brief history of MS-13. So, and really, in one sense, yes, they are violent, but I wouldn't say that they're like, oh, so much more brutal than other gangs that you see out there. It's just a different approach, different background. And yes, they are mostly Hispanic. From most of their members have either Salvadorian background or occasionally Mexican, but it's usually Central American. So, all right. I think we took care of that, except for, yeah, and he does make a good point. Caden does, and I'm going to spend more time on this in a separate feedback. I know there's a lot I have to kind of go through this one, but either way, yeah, youth who are at risk have a much higher likelihood of, well, for one, delinquent behavior. They also have, most of them who are considered in that class of high at risk or high risk youth are already involved with delinquent behavior. They're already involved with, say, poor academic performance, drug usage, alcohol usage. They are already in that. So whether or not they are part of a gang yet, that's left to be, that's left unsaid. However, that's definitely opens door for them, because those who provide those things for them are usually gang members, whether it be because they're related to them or not. But usually that's what causes them to have problems at risk. Like why they're at risk use is because they are, in order to get those things such as drugs or alcohol, or even parties. Because let's just put it out there like it is, that a lot of these gangs, the way they recruit some of these younger people is simply by throwing parties or having parties, because they are in these poorer neighborhoods, to where there isn't much money, or isn't much to go around. So yeah, parties are great. You can have your drugs, your alcohol, your for a lot of the guys, since most gangs are made up of men, you have your women. In essence, as the youth gets older, eventually becomes that attraction for sexual activity. All those sorts of things and reasons are kind of why at-risk youth are more likely to join gangs, or at least it's a bigger temptation for them. And they get that it's truly not support and security, even though I understand the point that was being made. It is a perception of support and security for those kids who don't have a real stable home. Those people, the gangs offer that, or like, oh, well, you're part of our family, or we'll look after you. Really, that's not the case. It's more like, we're going to put it out there like you're a part of our family, but when it hits the fan, whatever will benefit them, or the gang itself, excuse me, the gang itself more, that's what's going to happen. Those who are in control of the gang, that's who's going to have most influence. So yeah, it's all, like I said, all those promises. It's almost like the same thing that terrorists do. They kind of go and attack or seek out those who are more vulnerable, and promise them some type of belonging, and support and money. And money and power is another thing that gang members offer. So either way, all right. Well, for right now, what I'm going to do is kind of stop here, because I'm getting close on my time limitation. And then I will come back and continue more on this discussion. So I will see you in a little bit. At least you'll hear from me.